Your Locked On Coyotes, your daily podcast on the Arizona Coyotes, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to the show, everybody. This is Locked On Coyotes, your number one daily podcast on the Arizona Coyotes. I am your host, Robyn Leonio. We're going to get back into part two of our talk with Kyle Pereira, of our draft expert, as we talk about a lot of different prospects that could potentially fit in with the Arizona Coyotes. It was a great talk with them, and this is part two of a three-part series, so just be sure to stay locked in. Now, one thing that really interests me is, I think there's been some talk about it, but like maybe it's been just me, who knows? But I feel like one of the two first-round picks for the Arizona Coyotes has to be a defenseman. And you mentioned some defenseman name. You mentioned Reinbacher, and you mentioned ASP. Anybody else interests you among the defensive side who could potentially get maybe as high as 6 if they go there, but I think they're at around that 12 spot?
There aren't a lot. The defensemen in this class are interesting because you have the clear two in Reinbacher and ASP. Those are the clear top two defensemen in the class, and they're you can flip them both in your rankings, and no one would really argue either way. They're pretty close in terms of value. Outside of that, it can get a bit iffy. Most of them are late firsts or mid to late firsts, but two names come to mind that I think could be intriguing picks at 12. Maybe not the best choices, but very intriguing choices is Tom Willander and Mikhail Gulyayev. So Mikhail Gulyayev is a defenseman out in Russia. He has the same contract situation as Michkov. I don't know if it's as long or longer, but it's around the same range. I think 2025, 2026 is when his contract ends in Russia. So he's got a few years in Russia, but he is a raw, offensively oriented defenseman who, in my opinion, has just as much value as Reinbacher and Axel Sandin Pellikka, but falls under the radar because of the Russian factor. And also, I just feel like not a lot of people are giving him enough credit. His defensive game is underrated, in my opinion. I think people blow that a little bit out of proportion. I don't think he's a bad defenseman by any means, but he's certainly a great puck mover, great offensive player, and if that translates well at a higher level, could be a top pairing defenseman, or at the very least a top 4 defenseman if he hits his potential in the NHL level. I think he's really, really good. And then Tom Willander, I think he's an excellent skater, and that mindset has only been solidified by reading other reports on him. And some people have even claimed that he's the best skater, in the draft class. So the skating value that he brings to the table is phenomenal already at a young age. He plays a steady two-way game. He's really, really good in his own end, really mature for his age in terms of awareness in the defensive zone. He's a very, very effective puck mover. He may not jump off the page at you in terms of his transitional play and puck moving abilities, but there's something really efficient there that I think a lot of NHL coaches would love. And his offensive game is really, really good. It's not flashy. He's not going to make many mistakes by forcing passes, and he's not going to be a high-paced, fast-paced kind of defenseman who's going to jump down from the point like Cale Makar. But he is really good at commanding play from the point and just quarterbacking play, not just on the power play, but at 5-on-5 too, moving the puck and finding open areas to move it into. He's just really, really smart on all three zones. And he's another guy who I think might be a little underrated in this class just because of how good the forwards are this year.
One thing that shot out to me, and please tell me if I'm on the wrong track here, that last player profile sounds so much to me like a more a higher offensive value JJ Moser. That there was so many things that you mentioned that I can compare to. Well, I think Moser is phenomenal in the defensive zone, and definitely a lot better in the defensive aspect. The puck moving is also still pretty much there. So am I off with that comparison? Am I just picking a couple attributes and cherry picking them there?
I think you're not too far off. I mean, I suck at NHL comparables, to be honest. I don't. For a guy who watches as much hockey as I do, I don't follow the NHL as much as I probably should. But I mean, knowing JJ Moser from the time that I scouted him, I think it's not a far off comparable by any means. But yeah, certainly more offensive value than Moser. And Moser, again, he was an overager, I believe. I think he was a year older, undrafted 1 year, if I'm not mistaken. I could be wrong.
I think he was 2 years older.
2 years older, yeah.
I think you told me that was his last year of eligibility, or it was about to be his last year of eligibility, and you're like, yeah, no, a lot of people were looking the other way, and they were looking at the Coyotes weird for that pick because of his age.
Yeah, I knew it was something to do with his age. I couldn't remember how much older he was, but at the time when he was drafted, obviously he showed a pro readiness that I mentioned to you, and that's one of my best calls that I've made. But for Willander, I think he plays a very pro-ready style, similar to JJ Moser, but he's younger, which means his potential is substantially higher than Moser. Like, Moser might top out as a second pair defenseman. I don't know if he has I don't follow the Coyotes, so I don't know how much his trajectory has changed. But certainly Willander's case, I could envision him being a really good number 2 defenseman for an offensive guy like a Kel McCarr-esque defenseman. So that's the potential that I see with Willander.
And it's good to have someone that has that potential, especially for someone like the Arizona Coyotes, because right now they don't have a top, like a 1 or 2 number 2 D-man like the US. They're like, second pair or third pairing. So they need a guy like that. But those are, as you mentioned, guys that kind of might be underrated because Rainbacher and ASP were kind of overshadowing them at this point. I mean, ASP was a guy that I've mentioned, I think, on this podcast months ago before, as a potential pick for the Coyotes. And I still think if the Coyotes can make it work, that he'd be the one. He'd be the defenseman I personally would take. I'm not sure what you how you would view that.
I think out of all the defensemen, ASP has the highest ceiling. That could be argued, of course, as most prospects would. I mean, there's a lot of guys with boom or bust potential that could project as better. But in terms of how comfortable I am saying that he has the highest potential, I would say that he's the guy that I would pick if I had a choice. He's my top-ranked defenseman. Rainbacher's one spot below him on my ranking, so it's not like there's a lot of difference between the two. They're really close. But I think he has the better potential, especially offensively, in terms of producing from the back end. His potential is really, really high. And Gulyaev's the second defenseman on my board that has the highest potential, right behind ASP. So I think it's really close with those three in terms of potential, him, Reinbacher, and Gulyaev. But I would pick ASP. Like I said, he's my number 1 defenseman on my board.
Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Baseball season is in full swing. There's no better place to get in on the action than with FanDuel, America's number 1 sportsbook. Because right now, new customers get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's up to $1,000 back in bonus bets if your first bet doesn't win. Just go to FanDuel.com/lockedon and join today. I might not be the biggest gambling man, but you know what? If you give me an Arizona Rattlers option, I would totally take the Rattlers to win the championship. But I also wouldn't mind putting like $10 on the Coyotes to win because their odds are amazing if you want to get a high return. But hey, there you go. Don't miss your chance to snag the no-sweat first bet up to $1,000 when you join FanDuel today. Just go to FanDuel.com/lockedon to sign up. FanDuel, official partner of Major League Baseball. Of the defensemen you just listed off that weren't the top 2, if the Coyotes managed to pick one of them with a second-round pick, is that something that you should be, as a Coyotes fan, just essentially from the rooftops cheering for? Or is that something where it's like, yeah, it's probably where they're going to end up?
I'm not sure. Willander's definitely caught some heat towards the end of the year. A lot of people started picking up on him a little bit better. Skating ability certainly stood out in a big way for him. And I think some people started to catch on and realize he's more than just a great skater. He's got some flair to him. He's got some potential to him. So I'm not sure if he'd be available in the in the second round, even early second round. I think he might go late first. Gulyaev's a wild card because, again, the Russian situation, his contract out in Russia is complicated, and he's not as talented as Michkov, so that makes it a lot easier for teams to kind of look the other way. So if he's available in the second round, GMs they'll look real dumb if they don't take him, because he has that sort of potential in my honest opinion. If Willander falls, so if Gulyayev falls, I'll stick on that. If Gulyayev falls, I think that's cause for some celebration for Coyotes fans, because I think he does truly have number 1 D potential if he can translate his offensive game to the next level. As for Willander, it's not as big of a celebration because I don't think he has that number 1 D potential, but he plays a pro-ready style. He does a lot of the little things that coaches will love. He may not stand out, and he may not be like the hero for fans, but when he does make plays and you start to pick up on the things that he does, you realize just how valuable he is. Kind of like a Ryan McDonough. He doesn't stand out, but at the end of the day, when he leaves, you notice that he's not on the ice, like that sort of thing. Like that's what Willander can bring to the table. So if he's available in the second round, I mean, yeah, why not? If you're the Coyotes, take him.
With a guy like Willander, would that also be something that's interesting to take a look at? They have plenty of assets. Trade a couple of second-round picks to try to get back into the first round. If it's, let's say, around 20th, I don't know where you have him projected going. So let's just say it's 20th. Would you try to pull the trigger on that and try to trade back up to get him, or is it someone where if you get him, great. If you miss him, it is what it is?
Yeah, I would certainly try trading up within the 20th to 30th overall picks. I think that's about the range that I expect him to fall into. I think the Coyotes, they certainly have the assets to do it. But I think what it comes down to is, A, did they draft a defenseman already? And B, if they did, who was that defenseman? And was that their number 1 defenseman? Because if they rate ASP higher than Rainbacher, and they don't get Rainbacher, so they settle with ASP at 12 or something, then maybe they'd say, you know what, we didn't get the guy we wanted, so let's trade up. This guy's still available. We really like him. Let's get him too and double up, so at least we have a second guy that could sort of kind of balance it out that we missed the first guy. If they don't get either one of them, certainly they're going to be pushing for a defenseman. As you mentioned, Robyn, you want them to get a defenseman. You think they should get a defenseman. So if that's their plan, they want to get a defenseman, and they don't get Reinbacher or ASP, trading up and getting Willander would be a really smart move that could pay dividends really quickly, within a year, I think, before he makes the NHL.
I realized about 15 minutes ago, but I really wanted to bring this back up after we finished the detailed discussion on the defenseman, which TLDR, just in case anyone fell asleep staring into Kyle's eyes over here, if Wallender's available right around 20, trade a couple second-round picks and get up in there. But Will Smith, who was seen as kind of that 6th overall, that guy that the Coyotes are going to be stuck with as a consolation prize after they went on that tear at the end of the season on that point streak, that I correct me if I'm wrong, you weren't the highest on him for a couple of reasons. Is that someone they should look at? Let's just say Benson's gone. Let's say Michkov's gone. Is that someone you should look at 6, or try to trade back a couple and just grab Leonard if you can?
Will Smith is an outstanding forward. I'm lower on him for personal preference more than anything. But when I set my biases aside, my preferences aside, what you have on the surface is an exceptionally talented forward. There's no doubt about it. The stick handling is phenomenal. The creativity, the confidence, he oozes it. Like, he is a very, very good forward. He's just so good with the puck on his stick. The problem I have with Will Smith is he doesn't do a lot of the dirty work. In discussions with guys out at Last Word, was he kind of reminds me of a little bit of like 2020 playoff William Nylander, or playoff Mitch Marner, where he's exceptionally skilled. He can do magical things with the puck on his stick, but when it matters most and he really needs to go that extra distance, battling along the boards and winning puck battles, he's not going to be the guy to do that. I think that's why Ryan Leonard was so important for that line with the NTDP, and what led to Will Smith being even better than he might actually be deep down. I'm not trying to say that Leonard elevated him to the point where he became elite for the year, but more that Leonard kind of masked his deficiencies almost, and made it seem like there was less of a problem there. I'm concerned about his projectability to the NHL as well. His off-puck movement leaves a little bit to be desired. Like when he doesn't have the puck, it's almost like he's the Energizer bunny without the batteries. Like he's not doing a whole lot. But when he has the puck, it's like the batteries are put in and now he's going, nonstop for however long he has the puck for. So my biggest concern is his off-puck abilities. His defensive zone abilities will drive coaches crazy if he doesn't improve in that area, just engagement-wise. Those are my main concerns. But on the surface, you have a kid that has sky-high potential. Like this is a guy that could be an elite forward in terms of point production in the future, like Nylander and like Marner. But when the checking gets a little bit tighter, the physicality's amped up, the intensity's amped up, I'm not too confident in saying that he'll answer that bell. That's just not the player he is.
So to kind of, reiterate the question that Matthew had, does that go with saying like, hey, you have, if it were, looking at between, Smith and Leonard, you'd rather probably go with a player like Leonard?
Me personally, I'd rather go Leonard because I think his potential's there. And he does a lot of the little things like I mentioned before, but he also has a floor to his game where I can comfortably say at the least he could be a really solid third liner. Like if he makes it to the NHL, that's never a guarantee. But if he makes it to the NHL, I look at him and say like, that's a kid who can play on a third line and have success. He may not be the most, he might not produce the most points. He might not be looked at as a great player, but he'll play his role. He'll play his role well, and he'll be a valuable piece for that team. Whereas Will Smith, if you put him on a third line in the NHL, he won't be with teammates that will elevate his game, most likely. And so I don't know if he'll be able to play that sort of role. So I'm more comfortable picking Leonard for that reason alone. It's just he can play anywhere in a lineup, play to that role, and he'll be able to find success, whereas Smith has to play a top six role to find success, in my opinion.
So it sounds like the debate of a good top nine anchor versus an asset that is so volatile that let's say like you're getting ready to invest in a crypto or a stock, and it's like this asset could go to the moon. It also could literally just bottom out and you lost all your money. So that's what it sounds like you're saying. And the traditional best player available, because you have to, even if you need a defenseman, Robyn, I know we need a defenseman. If we think that Leonard is better than Reinbacher as a best player available context, you got to go with that. So of the two, are we all in agreement that Leonard is probably the best player available out of those two specifically?
Again, on my board, I would pick Leonard. He's one of my favorite prospects in the draft.
All right, I just want to make sure that it'll fit everything from the use. It doesn't really sound like we need a guy in Arizona like Smith because we already have so many players that can fill that same role. The first couple players are Clayton Keller and Dylan Guenther. We need to have that shooting ability. But a top nine anchor is someone that you could always use, and if he's going to elevate, if he can get himself in the top six, phenomenal. If he can't, you still got that third line center where we're kind of in an embarrassment of riches to a small extent with centers right now. We're hating it from a guy that could just be a good third line center, very defensively responsible, pass the puck pretty well too. He might battle for that second line center spot, so then you have him and Cooley and a couple other guys. Just keep throwing more to just kind of log jam the middle, because if you have a strong center core, everything else kind of falls in place typically, and also a center can go play wing. Wings can't typically play center.
Yeah, I mean, Leonard played a bit of everything this year, so he also brings that versatility. If you need a center, he can play center. If you need a wing, it's his more natural position. He can play wing, and he's also defensively responsible from the wing because of his experience at center. So, I mean, he's a jack of all trades kind of player where, again, whatever role you want to give to him, he'll be able to play.
And that's going to be it for part 2 of our 3-part series as we talk of Kyle Pereira, our draft expert here on Locked On Coyotes. We're going to continue with part 3 coming out tomorrow, so be sure to stay locked in. If you like this episode today, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe if you have yet to already. We are available everywhere you get your podcasts, including on YouTube and the SiriusXM radio app. Just be sure to look up Locked On Coyotes. Don't forget to interact with us on social media. We're on Facebook, facebook.com/LockedOnCoyotes. and on Twitter at LO_Coyotes. I am personally at Robyn_Leonio. Matthew Jacobson is at the AZ Sports Guy. Interact with us, ask a question you might have. We might answer right back or on a future episode of the Locked On Coyotes podcast. Thanks again, everyone, for listening to today's episode. Hope you guys are staying safe out there. Hope you guys are staying healthy. And don't forget to howl on.